Women's Soccer Review Podcast with Dwayne Rollins and Jonathan Tannenwald on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Women's Soccer Review here on the Sports Podcasting Network. I'm Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer, and before we get all the way started here, let me first say thank you to all the listeners who have driven this show high up some of the major podcasting charts, especially when it comes to women's soccer. I really do appreciate that. I think you all know, especially those of you who listen to the other shows here on the Sports Podcasting Network, how much time and energy and money Dwayne and Kevin have put in to this venture, and I'm very happy to see them be rewarded for it. This is a passion project for me. In addition to my work at the Inquirer, I remain thankful that Dwayne and Kevin have given me the latitude to have this show, and of course I'm always happy to have them on as much as I can. This will unfortunately be another day where things came together in such a way that it's just me and the guest. But I promise Dwayne and Kevin will be back soon enough. We have a whole lot to talk about, especially in the rest of the women's soccer world. Once we have moved on from the NWSL Challenge Cup in full, we got a lot of interesting topics coming up. We'll focus on Canada in the coming weeks. We'll, of course, get ready for the new season of the Women's Super League over in England. Lots of other things, perhaps, along the way to the Champions League I should mention. We'll probably do a show about that. For now, we will put a bow on the NWSL Challenge Cup, and we will do so with Charles Olney, who writes for BacklineSoccer and SB Nation's All for 11 and Stars and Stripes FC, and has his own show on women's soccer centered around the Houston Dash, because he is normally based down in Brownsville, Texas, down in the Rio Grande Valley, where that organization, which is the Dash and the Dynamo, has their USL affiliate, Rio Grande Valley FC. And, of course, the podcast is called Actually the Dash. And Charles, Actually the Dash, won the NWSL Challenge Cup. To their great credit. Welcome aboard to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, it's a pretty exciting time to be covering the Dash.
And you're not in Texas right now for non-soccer reasons. I've been checking in on the Houston Chronicle over the last few days to see how they have been covering the Dash's win. It was front page news in the sports section, and even a big photo on A1 too, on Monday, the day after the final. And this organization, let's start at the big picture, which is this organization, even though it is, you'd expect it to be one of the bigger ones in the NWSL because it has, the overall part of the MLS organization, and supposedly all the resources that would come with it. They've never been one of the big teams in this league. And here they are finally having won a trophy. How much does it matter for them?
I think it matters a huge amount for precisely the reason you just identified, which is that despite theoretically having a lot of support and infrastructure, it's been a team that players historically haven't really been necessarily too excited to come play for, and that fans haven't necessarily stuck around with too much. But it's just an indication that if you start to get things right and you build an organization, sort of up from the ground, there's just so much potential to grow and expand. And so the only downside to any of this is that I just wish this could have happened in a year that was not, coronavirus, so they could turn around and have events and get people engaged and actively, involved with the team in a way that might be a little bit difficult, if there's not necessarily going to be games coming up soon. But it's a huge turnaround from the organization that I think a lot of us in the women's soccer community have been disappointed with over the previous years, and they've really invested effort and time, and it's just great to see that pay off.
The biggest talking point with this traditionally has been its lack of a major star. They haven't really had an absolute top of the line, command the marquee presence. They had good players, but everybody knows what I mean. This team does not have any major U.S. national team players. It's got some notable Canadians, and that's something that I think Dwayne and Kevin and I will discuss down the road when we really get into the state of Canadian women's soccer on a future show. It's got Rachel Daly, and I noticed that the English media are paying attention because of her. And before we get to the next name that I was going to mention, why don't we stop on Rachel Daly and figure out why she isn't a bigger star in this league?
It is kind of hard to figure out, other than just she's been playing with the Dash for, she said five long years without necessarily a lot of success. And I think for a lot of folks who, are really closely following the league, they know that she had just an excellent season 2 years ago and has really been one of the best forwards in the league for those last 2 years, 3 or 4 years possibly. But, she played for the Dash. It's hard to really make a splash when your team is kind of toiling around in 5th, 6th, 7th place and never really challenging for the playoffs. And she plays for England, which, is a pretty big team, but also is kind of backed up behind some of the best strikers in the world. So has been deployed there as more of a fullback than a forward. And so she just hasn't quite managed to burst, to the top level. I think this tournament might be the difference. I don't really know that she played any better here than she has over the last 2 years. Just that's not a knock on how well she did here. Just that's how good she's been for quite a while. And I do think that, as you say, the Dash, they had Carly Lloyd for a little while, but they kind of didn't because she was missing for long stretches with the national team over in England. And that's kind of the only, big national star that they've had available. I am very curious to see if Daly kind of turns into one of those major names that matter to people beyond just those of us who follow really closely, because I think she certainly has the ability and the potential.
And the next name I was going to get to, of course, is Christy Muist, who was such a big-time prospect for so long and then had just an enormous pile of brutal injuries that took her off the field for 1, 2, I'm counting, 3 years. It's remarkable. She was an under-17 World Cup winner with the United States, runner-up, not winner, in 2008 with the U.S. under-17s. She was on that path and never got there. And even in this final, she suffered a hamstring injury in the first half and had to just totally in tears because that was her big stage, and she won the penalty that led to the opening goal. She comes out of this as one of the best stories of the tournament, I think, and she might never, she's 29 now. She might never realize 100%, of her national team potential, but to see her celebrate exuberantly in a manner that she earned, shall we say, that was good to see.
Especially, I think that Houston's her 5th NWSL team over the course of, the length of the league's history. And I believe that ties her with, a few other players, Jess McDonald and, Kaylin Kyle back in the day. But she's been around a lot of teams and a lot of pretty bad teams. She was there with the Breakers for quite a few years where they were, bottom of the league. She was on that Spirit team that finished at the bottom of the league. She played for Chicago for a game, scored a goal and then immediately was traded again. But other than that, it's just you have to go all the way back to that initial, 2013 season with FCKC when she was in the U.S. national team picture and a real rising star. She just hasn't seen a lot of success. And it's another one of those players where, as you say, if not for injuries, the potential, the actual ability on the ball and, vision of the field, she's right up there with the best players in the league. So it's really been wonderful. She played really well last year. I think I put her in my best 11 actually at the end of the year. But to see that translate into, success and results on the field was just fantastic. She's, we had her on the Dash podcast about halfway through the tournament, and she's just really insightful, has a lot of interesting and smart stuff to say about competing in the league and being someone who's been in the national team picture, but also long time been away from that national team picture, and was in the developmental camp, last off season with a bunch of 21 and 22-year-olds, and sort of a little bit out of place in that process. So I would certainly love to see her get, some more chances back at the very highest level. But as you say, if that never comes to fruition, I think this was a really big moment. And while it was really a shame to see her come off after, 20 minutes or so, from a Dash perspective, it was great to see that she created the goal that ended up being the winner, even if she had to come off kind of early.
And I don't know what, one of her dear friends in the league, former player Stephanie McCaffrey, lives down the street from me, believe it or not, here in Philadelphia. I've written about her before for the Inquirer and the work she's doing here now. Steph's allegiance was torn because she grew up with Christy and Sam, but obviously played for the Red Stars. But I'm fairly certain that at the end of the day, Steph was pretty happy. And if somehow or other she's listening to this show, I don't know if she does, but if she is, I wanted to give her a shout out because she's been friends with Christy for a really, really long time, since they all grew up in Massachusetts together. Another player, Charles, who stood out in this tournament and was the MVP of the final, Shea Groom. And like Christy Muist, she might be just the wrong side of the age mark, being 27. And she also, as great as she's been in the league and as great as she was in a tournament when Alex Morgan and Kristen Press and Tobin Heath and Megan Rapinoe and Carly Lloyd and Mallory Pugh all weren't there. You get where I'm going, which is, as good as she is, there might not be room for her on the national team. And that is no slight to her. But I don't know. Flacco might call her in for, to give her a look, give her a run, give her the reward of making it there. But unless there's a whole bunch of retirements in the next year, is Shea Groom going to be, do you think? And I would like to think that what I'm about to say is a good thing because it means that there's so much depth of talent in the NWSL. But is it possible that Shea Groom just ends up being a great NWSL player?
Yeah, it's a question that I have been pondering for many years now. I wrote a piece for Stars and Stripes FC back in 2017 saying, Shea Groom should get a look on the national team. And she's had two not great years since then. And, she's been pretty open about how difficult those years were. With FCKC folding and then her end up getting traded to Sky Blue and kind of the difficulties of that Sky Blue team. And she couldn't really find a way to get a hold of last season with the Reign. So I've just been really thrilled to see her come into Houston and bring, she's a ferocious player. She's an aggressive player. And that's really the dynamic that the Dash have been actively trying to cultivate. And so it's a really good fit. And if that's all that it ends up being, I think this is a shining moment. And I think the NWSL is increasingly something that people are going to take seriously as its own thing. And, you could be a really successful NWSL career player with an MVP and a final of the Challenge Cup. And that can be a real serious success story. As you say, Flacco was her coach back at FCKC and was an enormous fan of her game. And, back in the day when he was still, coaching at the club level, made some comments pretty aggressively about she deserved a call up for the national team. So I would be pretty surprised if when the U.S. national team eventually does come back, if Groom doesn't at least get a chance to, come into camp and kind of see what she can provide. The problem is just there's no probably position in the world with more depth than the forward line of the U.S. right now. So it's kind of would have to be as more of a jack of all trades, can contribute a lot in 20 minutes of as a sub kind of role, it's really hard to see. As much as I love Groom's game, she just doesn't quite have the same sort of, cutting edge as an Alex Morgan, or, just nose for goal of a Carly Lloyd, or, ability to sort of do incredible things with the ball as a Rose Lavelle or someone like that. So there's absolutely no shame in being a cut below that group of players. I hope that she's given the chance and maybe can continue to develop and grow. But if it never ends up happening, I think that having a moment like this is a pretty fine way to top off her career. So I feel all right about that for her sake.
And if they were going into a tournament with a 23-player roster instead of an 18-player roster, it might even be different on top of that. But that's for a different show. I want to ask about James Clarkson, the manager, who, while we're on the air, actually just favorited one of my tweets. It so happens. I like him. I've only talked to him from afar on, in Zoom calls and maybe once at a draft or something like that. He's quick with a sharp quote, which obviously those of us in the media appreciate. He played the underdog card terrifically in the tournament. And yet, when he was hired, a lot of people weren't thrilled. But the players, from what I heard at the time, the players really liked him, and they were happy that he was the manager. And obviously the key word in everything that I just said is he, and we all have this discussion endlessly about the lack of, there are not nearly enough women managers in the league. The pipeline for coaches to develop is only now nascent, and it's way behind. And I think we can all keep pounding that drum for a long time to come. But if the players like the manager, and the manager coaches the players well, and they win something, who are we to complain?
I mean, I don't think there's any denying that he's had enormous, success, and that the, development of the team. This wasn't a fluke. That, it was a cup competition. It's a relatively short process. You win 3 knockout games, but the Dash outplayed Portland and Chicago in the semifinals and finals, and a lot of people over the course of the event, were questioning. He was Daly played, I think, all but about 15 minutes of the whole tournament. Groom and Muist were out there for quite a long time as well, and the whole time through, he kind of just kept saying, "Look, I know what I'm doing. We know what we're doing." And you hear coaches say that a lot, and then you see things get exposed, and very much the opposite happened here. This is a group that was really, strongly working for each other. And I don't think there's any way you can create that without, some level of the manager, organizing things and setting everyone up in the right way. And just consistently, if you talked to any of the Dash players over the previous 3 or 4 months, as I've been doing, they think he's great, and they are really enthusiastic about the team dynamic, the team culture, and all of that compares to very much the opposite with the previous coach, Vera Pauw, who actually, found quite a bit of success with the team, but just did not get along with the players. Players didn't get along with her. And so I was definitely one of those who was disappointed when, one of the few women that were coaching in the league was not asked to renew her contract after what from the outside looked like a pretty successful season. And just another, British manager, on the men's side was brought in. And I do think that it's worth consistently beating that drum, not necessarily as a challenge to any specific manager. We've had quite a few very, very good, Vlatko and Paul Riley and Mark Parsons and now Clarkson. And there's a lot of folks in the league who are really doing a great job. And I think we can be very supportive of the work they're doing, while just also acknowledging that it is, I think, a problem that there's only one head coach that's a woman in the league. And I really do hope that teams, as they're looking for new options, are very aggressively pursuing potential folks who are not men. But it does come down to, it's very hard to criticize a team for bringing in a manager who took a franchise that had never made a playoff game or even particularly been close, and in his second year won, the only tournament that was on offer. And the thing that I kind of noticed out of everything, from the chances of talking to Clarkson a lot over the past month and a half or so, is just how clearly he would state stuff that I think a lot of other folks probably would agree with, but just don't seem to be able to communicate, and I think that is made very clear in the way his team plays. This is not a team that is really trying to do fancy stuff. They're playing a pretty straightforward style, but bringing in a few little tweaks and just executing them wonderfully. And so it's not a team that was pressing aggressively, but when they pressed, they really, really made it count. It was not a team that was playing in the wide spaces at all, but the moments where they went out wide, they really made it count. And that's really hard to do. That's something that I think the Dash really showed that they have the potential to accomplish. And I think Clarkson deserves a lot of credit for keeping everyone on the same page and for cultivating an environment that was supportive and productive. There was a bit of drama happened in the middle of this tournament with one of the players, and they seemed to get through that without any particular trouble. That's really hard to do. I think he deserves a lot of credit for it.
I remember seeing something about that. And would you be willing to tell our listeners about it if you're able?
Yes. So I'm in the middle of running an institute for my students to prepare them for law school. So I have to admit, this all kind of took place on a day that I was completely offline and came around for the end of it. So I may not know all the details in the middle here, but one of the players, Katie Stengel, appears to have established a consensual and perfectly legitimate relationship with one of the people on the coaching staff, which some of the other players seem to have not been enthusiastic about. And there are reasonable questions to be asked about just power relationships and circumstances in a weird kind of bubble situation. And it all kind of escalated quickly out of control, and seems like there may have been violations of the bubble process. It's not exactly clear. But all of which is just to say, it could easily have blown up. It could easily have been a situation where factions were created and cliques were formed and everyone had to pick sides. And it seems like what ended up happening is everyone said, we keep our eye on the prize here, and we all get home and drink our Budweisers, and in celebration, maybe we can pick fights with one another about exactly what went down. And maybe that's going on right now as far as we know. But it's a situation where the team appears to have not missed a beat for 1 second. Stengel didn't dress for the quarterfinals, but was there for the semifinals and finals. Didn't end up playing. Didn't seem like they necessarily needed her. I don't know if that was ever a possibility. So that's kind of the way it goes, right? People are going to run into create circumstances for themselves. Nothing is ever going to run perfectly. And I think success is just a measure of how you deal with the problems you create for yourselves and the problems that throw themselves in front of you. And the Dash team dynamic seems to have been more than capable of addressing the particular drama that was created. Maybe they could have avoided it entirely in another world, but in this world, they encountered the circumstance and plowed right through it, which is about as good as you could hope for, I suppose.
That is another one of those don't search for it on Twitter, just don't do it kind of situations. I think I might have done it once at the time and couldn't find it, and just threw it in there again for the hell of it, and that was my fault. Okay, let's see here. I was going to ask about the best 11 and the fans influencing it, but I'm just not going to, because it's not worth the trouble. It's more of a mess than I want to get into at this point, I think, because there's just no point in disagreeing with it now Is there?
It is what it is. I would love 2 different awards if they could create it so that the fans could have input and there could be a different set of awards not based on that. But this is the system they've created. And in terms of what a best 11 could have looked like, it was much better than it could have been. So
that I'll agree with. There were a couple ones that I disagreed with. The goalkeeper obviously being at the top of the list, but it's just when the fans have a vote, the best 11 goalkeeper might be somebody who only played 1 or 2 games and wasn't even the best goalkeeper of the tournament by the own awards list. Anyway, let's take a quick break, come back, and then we will spend a few minutes discussing where the league goes from here. This is the Women's Soccer Review on the Sports Podcasting Network. I'm Jonathan Tannenwald, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Women's Soccer Review here on the Sports Podcasting Network. Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer with Charles Olney of BacklineSoccer and SB Nation and his own podcast called Actually the Dash. His Twitter handle where you can find him is OLNEYCE. And if you're interested in political science and pre-law academia, you can find him on Twitter at dr_Olney, OLNEY. I'm supposed to keep my mouth shut about politics. It's very hard, but I keep doing it because I'll be fired if I say too much. And that I've discussed on this show before, as folks know. Let us look ahead, Charles, to what might be next for the NWSL. And here I have on my screen the story from Meg Linehan of The Athletic, which considers players reporting back to their teams to resume training on somewhere in the middle of late August. August 17th is the theoretical date, and pursuant, of course, in quotes, to each team markets specific health restrictions and guidelines, end quote. And then Lisa Baird finally spilled the beans in a conference call with a bunch of reporters and admitted that the league would like to play more games this year and hinted that they might even like to play them in home markets, to which, Charles, allow me to say, please don't. And you're welcome to have whatever opinion you would like.
Please don't.
Okay. How about that? Please don't. And I realize that, you know, the NWSL and Major League Soccer are waiting for Major League Baseball to go first and to fail. Well, guess what? They're failing. And I'm a baseball fan. My team, Kevin's going to bleep this part of the show out. Sorry. My team won the World Series last year, the Washington Nationals. Kevin's going to bleep it out because he's a Montreal Expos fan. I'm prepared for that. Again, you've heard it from me and Charles, and you've heard it from other people around the league. Please don't. I realize CBS might want it. I realize sponsors might want it. If there's an opportunity to do another tournament somehow in, I don't know, late September, early October, somewhere by some miracle, maybe. Maybe for MLS, the same thing, to do a second tournament and give a CONCACAF Champions League berth to that team somehow. And then maybe give one to the team with, I don't know, the most ranked points over the two group stages, something, whatever. But please do not make these people get on planes and travel all over the country before many things, let's say. Your governor, Charles, maybe being one of them, if I may say so. Before many things change in this country, the United States. There, enough. That said, when and Charles, you were on that call too with the commissioner, right?
I was, yes.
Okay. So I asked what, as you like to very kindly say on Twitter, when I do this, I asked a pointed question of the commissioner about what happens next, and in particular, whether, because Meg reported that Sam Muist is going to go to Manchester City and that Rose Lavelle might follow her for a year. And, of course, I being a cynic, look, maybe it is only going to end up being a year, but I have had in my head for a long time some things that Carly Lloyd told me and other reporters when she went to Manchester City, which was marveling at the facilities, the coaching staff, and the ability to just be a soccer player and make enough money doing it, playing for a big-time European team, including in the Champions League. And no, it's not as competitive as it is in the NWSL, and it might be a little while yet before the FA Women's Super League overtakes the NWSL for competitiveness. But here they come, and they're coming in a hurry. And they're coming with a lot of money. And every once in a while, Charles, I wonder in a moment like this whether one of these days somebody's going to decide, you know what, I'm just going to stay over there. And I'm good enough, and Vlatko Ananovsky and Kate Markgraf are smart enough that they're going to call me in anyway. Then what, Charles?
I think that's likely, and I kind of don't think it's a problem, is the way that I've increasingly come down on it. I have been a pretty vocal proponent of the NWSL seizing the opportunity that they have as the most competitive, most best league in the world, in my opinion, as they have been for a few years now in terms of just top to bottom competition, and parlaying that into maintaining sort of dominant position. But it is true that the top teams in Europe have a willingness and a capacity to invest and access to facilities of a style that are just a little bit different than what is going to be available. Now we have Angel City FC coming in LA. That could potentially be a very compelling market for some players. And we have seen some of the top players in the world, Sam Kerr, Amadine Henry, Kim Little, folks like that, who have seen a lot of value in playing in the U.S. And I don't think it would be a problem if 5 or 10 years from now, the NWSL is just one of, 3 or 4 very, very good leagues around the world where maybe half to 2/3 of the major U.S. players from the national team are consistently playing for all sorts of reasons, close to friends and family and speak the language and all those kinds of things. But if a Crystal Dunn or a Carly Lloyd or a Sam Muist or Kristen Press or whoever wants to go and play at Man City or at Lyon or in Germany, I think that's all to the good, really. And we've heard from players like Carly Lloyd, Crystal Dunn, folks when they've come back. I mean, Alex Morgan, I think, came back a much better player after her time in Lyon, and I think we've seen that in her performances with the national team since. And it's just the case that you're going to get different kinds of looks. You're going to get different coaching. You're going to get different challenges in different environments. And so if Sam Muist sees value in going and playing just in a different style, in a different format, I think that there's really no reason we should think of that as a problem. I think the NWSL of 3 or 4 years ago might have been in danger if a bunch of the top national team players were seen as bolting. I don't think the league is in that level of danger anymore, and I think it could ultimately open up a little bit more space for that just below the surface level of players that we were just talking about, your Christy Muistes and Shea Grooms and maybe some other folks from other countries around the world who want to come play here. There could be some nice cross-pollination if that happens. And the danger, of course, is if everyone starts to flee and the league ends up being second tier. And, I think that the owners and the new ownership groups that are coming in certainly see that as a suboptimal outcome. And I think they will work to try and fight it. And we're seeing, access to additional money to pay players and things like that as some potential incentives. So I don't want to be totally rosy and optimistic and say that there's no danger at all. But the only other element is just, you started by saying they're looking at trying to get people in market, back in training, and maybe some games of some kind. The reality is that, and again, we don't want to talk about politics, but the reality is that the United States handling of coronavirus is just orders of magnitude worse than all the other major leagues.
I was going to say the word in my head would get bleeped out by Kevin for sure. So
yeah. So if I'm Sam Muist and I want to play competitive soccer over the next 9 months, I know I can get that if I go and play in England, and I don't see any reason to be sure that's available if I stay in the United States. That would change my calculations significantly. So I do think we'll need to see 12 months from now, as the European season has finished, is it continuing to be the case that it looks like, it's a trade imbalance moving in that direction, and that's a process that is growing, or is it something that was to some extent an oddity that was triggered by the specific handling of coronavirus? So I don't know that we can really make firm conclusions about anything right now, but I'm mostly on I think it's fine, and I would like to see some U.S. players playing abroad if they feel like that would be good for their game.
Well, this is the radio, Charles. We have to make firm conclusions on the spot. Look, I think a couple of things. One, the difference for me between this and the previous cases is that this is not an out year. This is still the year before the Olympics. And, it's different timing because it's 2 years between a World Cup and an Olympics instead of one. But we've never had an exodus like this during that stretch before. We've had them during the out years, that 2.5 or so years between the Olympics and the World Cup. And that I'm fine with. This to me is an odd one, but I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of there potentially not being any NWSL soccer for quite a while. And I asked Lisa Baird whether the league's decision makers feel the need to have more games this year. And the phrase I used to her was to stop more players from leaving for Europe. That might have been a little too strong on my part, but the point is, if there were more games the rest of this year, maybe some of these players would not feel so compelled to test the waters and go abroad, where, as you said, we know there are going to be league seasons in Europe. And here is what Lisa Baird responded. That is not the intent. The intent of doing training in any future competition format that we create is to continue to develop players. And it's also to ensure that our coaches and staff are continuing to develop the game here. So development is our goal and training is our goal. We know even now that we've heard some players wanting to get back, word back was in brackets, I had to drop that in, embracing and saying, I want to continue to develop what I've started, end quote. I wish I had the number for you, she said. We've had a lot of rookies, and this is their first time playing with us. We had young players, and that's a key component of our decision as an ownership group and with the NWSLPA going forward. That set off some alarm bells with me, because even if the games are going to be played behind closed doors with no fans, Sophia Smith doesn't pay the bills yet or draw the TV viewers. And of all those quote unquote young players, she's the only one who might. And followed by Ashley Sanchez and maybe then Morgan Weaver. And if coincidentally that vaguely resembles the order of the draft, well, guess what? Again, this is a competition to me between the NWSL and the FAWSL, and it's not stopping because the FAWSL is not going to say, oh, they're not playing over in the U.S., we're just going to let them go and let it be. They're not going to do that. They're going to keep pushing forward, and Man City and Chelsea and Arsenal did it with Heather O'Reilly at one point. They're going to take swings at this stuff. And the NWSL is going to have to answer in some form, I think. And I'm going to resurrect something that I've said many times over the years. The counterpunch might have to be a designated player rule. Not just this allocation money they have, but an actual honest-to-God designated player rule. And maybe we're having a different conversation, I admit, and I said I wasn't going to bring this, I said I wasn't going to bring this up anymore on the show, but I'm going to do it anyway. Maybe we're having a different conversation if the Royals had gotten Jennifer Marajan and Sarah Buhati over the line. Because that would have been a shot back across the bow of the teams in Europe to say, yes, here in the NWSL, we can still swing for the fences and bring the big players in from Europe. And the pandemic scuttled the whole thing. It scuttled players the Thorns were going to sign. It might also have turned the heat up on Lyon and PSG a little bit along the way, from at least my reading of the tea leaves. And so, am I overdoing it by saying that the WSL is not going to stop trying to get big name players just because the NWSL isn't playing?
Definitely not overdoing that. The one thing that I do continue to hold on to, though, and we're talking about beating things into the ground. I will continue to beat this into the ground. The WSL is 3 incredible teams and 9 teams who would all finish last in the NWSL. And maybe that's a slight overstatement, but just the gulf in talent between those top 3 teams and the rest of the league is so large that it's really hard to compare to the NWSL. And I think that the idea that those top teams and Manchester United is really leaning in, and I think they're trying to raise themselves to that top level, and it'll be a while probably before they have any potential to do it. And maybe some of these
they could do it. If they wanted to, they could do it tomorrow. But.
Well, yeah, Liverpool just got relegated despite having many, many, many millions of dollars available if they wanted to. So that will be the real test. If Reading and Liverpool and West Ham and these teams all decide, you know what, we also want to play. We really do want to invest, and we want to start bringing in. Maybe we can't get Sam Muist, but maybe we can get Christy Muist. Maybe we can't get Rose Lavelle, but maybe we can offer $100,000 or $200,000 to get a Shea Groom or Raquel Rodriguez or something. If that starts being the norm, that's a game that the NWSL I just don't think can win given the current ownership groups, and I don't think they want to try. And I don't think we've seen any evidence that that is the game, though. And at a certain point, Chelsea, Man City, and Arsenal just can't buy that many players, and Lyon and Wolfsburg and Barcelona and Juventus. I mean, there's just only so many of the big teams in the world, and they're all working on it. And I think that is probably going to create a dynamic where the top 50 or 60 players in the world mostly are going to want to play in Europe rather than the US. I just think that the talent pool in the United States is just incredibly deep in a way that dwarfs everywhere else in the world. And the NWSL is going to continue to be a very good league, even if they're not skimming off the very top talent. And I think that's the place that we just don't quite know what that's going to look like. Are we going to find players who go over, test the waters, and say, yes, the Champions League is a lot of fun, but it's just not that thrilling to consistently win 4 or 5-0 against Brighton? I want to go back to the league where every game is genuinely in doubt. Or is the competitiveness going to continue to grow and everyone is going to, jump into the arms race, in which case the NWSL is going to have to really, think seriously about what kind of league can it be. Because again, most U.S. players are probably just going to want to play in the U.S. And even if you took every U.S. women's national team player and they all played abroad, the NWSL would still be a very good league without them. That would be a real, ding on the international credibility of the league. The viewers are not going to tune in to watch the NWSL if it doesn't have any of those stars in it at the same level. And so certainly I don't think that's a result that the owners will want, but there may be quite a lot of middle space in between that we just kind of have to see how it plays out.
I'm going to throw one other name into the mix with all of this, and I think this is something that Dwayne and Kevin and I will get into when, as we mentioned, we're planning out a show on the state of Canadian women's soccer, the national team, their relationship with the NWSL, and so on. Jessie Fleming going to Chelsea instead of into the NWSL, and what that portends and why pure rampant speculation. I mean, it will be speculation on my part. Dwayne and Kevin might know more about why the CSA did not get her into the NWSL, while at the same time ignoring Evelyn Vienne and Bianca St. George and some other Canadian players in the league who are doing quite well. I think we will wrap it up there. Charles, this has been terrific. Thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been lots of fun.
All the best to you, and enjoy whatever this was going to end up passing for an off-season here. So for Charles Olney of BacklineSoccer, and of course for Dwayne Rollins and Kevin Laramie, this is Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer, thanking you for listening to the latest episode of the Women's Soccer Review here on the Sports Podcasting Network.